If you like this video, please give a thumbs up and subscribe. Hit the bell icon to be notified of new videos. The evening of the 8th of December 1992 will leave several residents of Houston, Texas bonded forever. That night, each would share an experience. Although they didn't realize it at the time, that was quite literally out of this world. Although those involved were unknown to each other, they were all in attendance at a meeting of abductees on the night in question, organized by an ex-CIA officer and UFO researcher, Derrell Sims. In total, 8 Houston residents were abducted that evening. All would report entering a strange light and in turn a small spacecraft. This would then take them to a larger spacecraft outside of Earth's orbit. What's more, all had long histories of alien abduction. Through investigations, it would appear as though they were part of some bizarre experiment. Furthermore, following the discovery of the abductions and the revelations that multiple people from such a small group were involved, each was abducted again. This time all would remember implants being removed from their nose, again each on the same night. It was as if this action was a decisive response, which only made the case even more intriguing. As opposed to random incidents seemingly unconnected despite similar detail, the incident over Houston in December 1992 appeared to offer evidence of a very purposeful and planned operation. Before we look at the incident in question, check out the short video below. It features news footage of Derrell Sims from a Houston television station. The controversial methods of Derrell Sims. Derrell Sims is a controversial person, even within the UFO community. He is on the one hand adept at the recovery of alien implants, with a rising catalogue of, apparently genuine, unknown materials. However, many others are highly critical of his methods and claims. Some even use his CIA background against him with insinuations of disinformation. Perhaps more damaging are those that accuse Sims of being an outright charlatan. In the summer of 1992, Sims was the chief abductions investigator for Houston UFO Network, HUFON. He would investigate the cases of several abductees in the Houston area. As part of his investigations, he would implement a plan to establish communications with the intelligence behind the abductions. Using several abductees with particularly long histories of abduction, hypnotic suggestions were placed into their subconscious. Sims' plan was for these suggestions to kick in should an abduction happen again. The abductee, although they perhaps wouldn't realize it, would ask questions and take in more detail about their surroundings. At least in theory. In November 1992, one of Sims' patients suffered an abduction. The HUFON file calls the subject DS92007PH. DS92007PH had undergone undergone Sims' hypnotic suggestion treatment. It would appear this treatment was successful. The subject managed to keep a clear memory for a prolonged amount of time into the incident. According to the report, the subject was able to communicate with her abductors, although they didn't reveal anything of consequence. They began to zap her to maintain full control. The more time in their presence, the subject began to feel herself losing mental control. During her hypnosis session, she would suddenly blurt out, "We know what you're doing. We know about." She then was cut off as if her outburst had provoked her abductors to silence her. Evidence of a clandestine mass abduction. The following month, for all the criticism of his methods, Sims would capture some remarkable results. In the days following the 8th of December 1992, he began to notice that several of his patients had recently suffered abductions. More specifically, they were all abducted on the same night, and by their recollections, by the same abductors. After suffering episodes of post-abduction syndrome, PAR, the abductees would independently give their accounts to Sims. These symptoms were often the sudden onset of intense dreams of an abduction, as well as nosebleeds and pains in the nasal cavities. None of the abductees were in contact with each other at this point. Their accounts, however, would be so similar they were almost identical. One abductee, DS92009LT, would awaken to an intense irritation in her eye one morning in mid-December. Upon rubbing it, she noticed a small dot fall out, an apparent implant. Another abductee, DS92002DM, would also experience nosebleeds and signs of PAR. Each would contact Sims, who would hypnotically regress them. The details they would give would be repeated almost exactly by several other abductees over the coming weeks. Subject DS92002DM was first regressed to the 10th of December. He would awake to find several strange creatures in his room. They quickly moved to his bed and removed something from his nose. They then promptly left, and he fell back to sleep. Sims then regressed DS92002DM back 2 days previously to the night of the 8th of December. The revelations were mind-blowing. The revelations of subject DS92002DM. Again, DS92002DM was asleep when a bright flash awoke him. No sound followed, so he ruled out a thunderstorm. Suddenly, he noticed a small gray alien in the room. It was wearing a harness, or utility belt. A voice entered his head from the alien, instructing him to follow him outside. He did so and could see a bright blue light shining at a spot on the ground outside his home. He stepped into the light and in an instant, he was in a large, round room. Again, the voice entered his mind and told him to remove his clothes. He did so and then followed the creature down a series of corridors. He wasn't sure how they moved through these corridors. Although he remembered walking at times, most of the journey was made by a means unknown. In one room, other alien creatures were present and would conduct a physical examination of him. It was then that he noticed another human in the room. This other person began asking questions of him. How did he know of previous abductions? Perhaps most bizarre, how did abductees find each other? And why would they want to meet? A model of the human brain was presented to DS92002DM. He was asked to show where the subconscious mind is located. As these questions came, he received a bizarre vision of another abductee, unknown to him, but descriptions match Sims files of patent DS92007PH. He believed this other abductee was asked the same questions as he. The next thing he knew, the human was no longer there and he was moving into another room. Visions of other abductees. This next room was also large and round, but the lighting, layout, and even the furnishings were different. Several other alien creatures entered this room. As well as the gray aliens and the human, were two tall brown aliens. Questions filled his mind about the subconscious part of the human brain. He also continued to receive visions of other abductees. They were all in the same room, naked, yet seemingly unaware of each other, as if in a trance-like state. He would recall his feeling that the abductors were trying to access their minds for information. Perhaps even more chilling, and despite him not knowing how he understood, he would recall a debate between these different aliens as to whether the experiment should continue, or whether it was compromised. As he was watching the scene unfold and the visions of other abductees continued, he suddenly thought, the other abductees don't know there are others here. At this point, the human walked over to him, as if picking up on the thought, and took hold of his hands. This seemed to block any other activity he was picked upon. There was another small but intriguing point, however. According to his regression, he was asked what he knew of Project Prometheus, to which his reply was nothing. Interestingly or not, 11 years later NASA would launch Project Prometheus, which would tackle nuclear-powered space propulsion. The naming of the project is most likely a coincidence. Given that nuclear propulsion would, in theory at least, give us the capability for long-term spaceflight, however, it is an interesting detail. Human and Animal Museum of Suspended Animation. There were also several reports of a large room, very much like a museum, that featured examples of numerous animals and humans from across the ages. These humans were from cultures across the globe and throughout time itself. What is perhaps more chilling, is that the impressions of the witnesses were that these examples were not models or even dead. They were alive and in suspended animation. This is something that many other abductees have spoken of before. We have written, for example, of Betty Andreasson, whose description of a museum was almost exact to those of the Houston abductions. Does this suggest a long-term incomprehensible experiment by an extraterrestrial intelligence? And if so, do these experiments only involve a select few, or might they be more widespread than most of us dare to think? Perhaps of most importance, are they for the benefit of humanity? If reports of human and animal museums in suspended animation are accurate, what would the purpose be? Might these examples of humans throughout the ages provide DNA to populate another planet elsewhere in the reaches of space? Perhaps, another experiment. Another Earth? It is certainly an intriguing case, as is the main researcher at the heart of it, Derrell Sims. It might be easier to dismiss Sims' results and methods if it wasn't for the glaring similarities to many other cases before and since. The video below features Sims speaking about his theories and cases in a little more detail.